All right, we're recording. Today we are live with Andrew Ray, who is the co-founder, CEO of Taxwire. Andrew, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Good to see you, man. Thank you for having me. This will be fun.
Yeah, excited to have you on. I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we first met or got connected just in the pre or during early COVID years on Twitter. We just
Yeah, yeah.
everyone was online in tech, at least in the moment who was in tech, and what a mishmash, right? What a crazy time.
I still miss it sometimes because I don't know. Maybe it was where I was at in my career at the time too, but that felt like such a pure moment in time, at least at first. I mean, I don't know about as time went on, but 2020 especially, maybe some of 2021, it was just this pure time where we were all locked up. We were all trying to, for many of us that actually, speaking for myself, that ended up being almost a great moment of reinvention because geographic barriers became much less prevalent, for at least for that moment in time of where you could just get into almost any room if you were doing interesting things on the internet. And so, yeah, it was pure, it was a lot of things were happening. Everybody was on it was if you love the internet, that was actually kind of a great time to be alive, even though generally it was a hard time in the world. And yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember, I think we started following you on Twitter. Gosh, it might have been right before, but it was definitely, I remember during early 2020, you were just you were doing everything. You were you had hot takes, you were doing the podcast, you were you were out there and you were hustling, and it was a great thing to see.
Well, it was that there was a period where I was post failure of my company, Publoft, that was backed by Jason Calacanis, and that ended because of a co-founder issue, which was unfortunate because it wasn't like I wasn't. It was unfinished business. I still wanted to do more things. So I feel like after that, I was literally doing everything: the podcast, newsletter, tweeting a lot, bunch of stuff. I was very hype, Clubhouse all day, every day, pretty much. And then I kind of ended up on Seed Scout. But anyways, it's good to have you live on the pod. I think you haven't been on before, right? This is your first time, right?
First time.
Cool. So let's dive into, just to start. What are you working on? What's Taxwire? What's your company? And we'll kind of dive into different areas of that. But just give us a high level for now.
Cool. Yeah. I am one of the co-founders and the CEO of Taxwire.com. We basically help software companies like B2B SaaS, AI, e-com brands, and then a lot of accounting firms with sales tax compliance. So think if you have had the fortunate problem of all of a sudden going from a business with very little revenue to all of a sudden a lot of revenue very quickly, and you sell in a bunch of states or countries. All of those places have different laws and regulations and different tax rates based on where your actual customer is, and it gets quite complicated to figure out where you're supposed to be collecting taxes. Then you have to actually register and then integrate something to calculate those rates. And wherever you're billing people, you have to file tax returns. It's quite annoying, and I dealt with this in a pretty big way at a previous company. And so we make it very easy to deal with all of the actual initial compliance stuff of getting registered in the States, fixing a mess if you have a mess, and then we integrate wherever you bill customers and they do all of the fun compliance stuff very easily and hopefully take it off your plate. So we probably, so yeah, I'm happy to double click on any of that stuff, but we've been at it for 20. I've been at it for 20 months, I think. And then, but we've only been a real business, I'd say, for 14 months is when it really kind of coalesced, and my co-founder came in, we signed our first customers, raised money, did the thing. So it's a fairly young company. Few dozen customers, still early stage, trying to figure it out, but yeah, it's been fun. Taxes are extremely boring to most people, and also very stressful. So the enjoying thing, believe it or not, they are interesting in their own way, but the most rewarding part is you take an anxiety off someone else's plate, which is, I actually think, the most rewarding part of building in this space.
I think one of the top 5, maybe top 10, definitely, maybe top 5 worst feelings I've ever had in business in my life is 2017. I have an LLC. I made a bunch of money. It was a successful year. I made, I don't know, 40,000 or something, whatever it was. And at the end of the year, I'm great. How did taxes work? And then someone told me it's a pass through, and I have to pay, what was it, $8,000 to $12,000 in taxes, and I had nothing saved up. And this is obviously, I think, this is different from that, but just taxes. In general, massive stressor for, I think, any founder that isn't an expert in it. So it's great that you exist. I think I just have a clarifying question, and maybe this will be embarrassing for me. Maybe I'll realize I've been doing it wrong the whole time. But like up until, I mean, today, like if I wanted to start something and everything I've ever done, forward thinking city, seed scout, pop loft, etc., I just make a Stripe link and people just are my customer and they pay me, and that's all I've actually done. I actually haven't done anything with sales tax. Have I been doing it wrong the last, like, my whole life? Or like walk me through what
Probably
should
not
I
your
be
whole
doing?
life.
Or
Probably not
yeah,
your
like
whole
tell
life.
me,
Yeah.
walk me
So
through, because I think a lot of
I'll
people
kinda
are in that bucket.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, and I think like honestly, like especially since much of this audience, I'm guessing, is like startup founders, startup folks. Often this is not a like pre-product market fit problem. This is very much a post-product market fit problem. Even if you're supposed to be doing something about it pre-PMF, like you probably shouldn't just like don't do anything. So to kind of take a step back, this was really not a problem for anything but the biggest companies in the world 20 years ago. Like pre the internet, this is like Walmart's problem, because Walmart sells stuff everywhere in every state in America, every country around the world, even to some degree. And so like they're worried about like, I have to collect and file sales tax every single month across thousands of products all across the US, all across the world. But your average small business, they're not doing anything, because they maybe sell stuff in like one singular physical place. And then the internet happens, and you had like 20 years where the laws were written such that in the US, and every state is a little bit different in the US for these tax laws, but they're written in a way such that if I am based in New York City, which is where I'm based, and I sell a product to someone in Texas, I do not have to collect taxes from that customer in Texas, because I am based in New York. And so I only have to worry about doing things in New York, because that is where we are physically based as a company. And a few years ago, there was a Supreme Court ruling that blew up those laws. And so now, if you're an e-commerce brand, a software company, whatever, you are like, according to the Supreme Court in this case, you were supposed to be collecting these taxes. And so fast forward to today, almost every state, and now increasingly most international countries, have laws that dictate that if you cross like a certain threshold, it's usually like 100,000 or 200,000, something like that, in sales in a given jurisdiction over like a 12-month period or something. Now you're supposed to start like registering and collecting and filing taxes here. So now realistically, like what happens is most people in the early days, even if they're supposed to be collecting taxes, they're not worried about it. They're just like, business, someone wants to pay me, sweet, Stripe payment link, go. Like this is awesome. And they kind of move on, or like Shopify or whatever it is. They just like start the business and it starts running. And so what typically happens is then one day you're at like $1 million, $5 million, $10 million in revenue. Maybe you've got a real finance person finally, or your accounting firm is like, hey, are we collecting sales tax? Or maybe you're like, a customer asks you say you're in B2B SaaS and you just sent that payment link and they're like, hey, are you not charging me sales tax for this? Like, and it's and then you're like, am I supposed to be? And then you go start realizing, oh shit, I'm supposed to be collecting sales tax in a bunch of these places. I've not been doing that. I don't even, and then you're hearing about this like economic nexus threshold, and you're like, what does that, and then you're just like, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. And then at that point, people either kick the can down the road even further because they're terrified of it, or they end up like coming to someone like us, they go to their accounting firm, whatever. But like basically you hit this point where you can't ignore it anymore, or even worse, the state comes to you. And now you have to like figure out what you're supposed to do and then potentially clean up like a historical situation in a way that doesn't cost you a bunch of money. That's that point in time is often where we plug in, and we'll come in and like, hey, we can like help you figure this out. If there are like back taxes to file, we'll do it. We'll file these complicated penalty waivers. You don't need to worry about it. That'll like save you money on like any penalties from the state. We'll get you right. And then we'll integrate in Stripe and actually make sure you're calculating the right rate on that payment link or whatever it is you're doing. It does for a smaller company, like maybe if you're a founder and you don't have a finance team and you've got a couple million in revenue, like we do sell to some folks like that, but a lot of the folks we're selling to, it's more than just them. They've got a real business. They've got a team around them. They're not just like solo running and gunning it, or we don't even talk to them. We just sell to their accounting firm, and their accounting firm tells them to use us. It usually ends up being one of those two things.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that this was, you knew that this kind of was a problem based on a prior company, and I don't know if I don't know what that company was, but I do want to dive into a little bit of your background. I think when we first chatted, not on the podcast, but I think just our first like intro call, like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, one thing that I kind of noticed about you is like I feel like you've navigated like breaking into tech like pretty flawlessly. Like I actually think you you did it right, and in a world where there's not like a playbook where it's just like, hey, like here's, if you want to break into tech, here's exactly what you do on a billboard. The moment you want to break in, it's actually quite hard to know how to do it. So can we just kind of talk through maybe a little bit of your background, your story? What did you do before Taxwire? And then I have a few meta questions around that. But like, walk me through what did you do before this, and maybe how'd you start
totally.
there?
Totally, yeah. I'll go way back and try to bridge it really fast because like the real starting point is usually informative. I grew up in a small ass town in Ohio, like an hour outside of Cincinnati. My mom's an immigrant, and my dad like just kind of like grew up working in like grocery stores and stuff. He's a small church pastor and works like 2 or 3 blue collar jobs to make money work. That was like how I grew up. We were always kind of teetering between just like flat out poor, like barely making it, like like lights going out, stuff like that. Trailer parks, you name it, like probably done a good bit of it, to like like maybe barely feeling like we might be able to make like the middle class. And so that's kind of how I grew up. Like my parents super hardworking, but like didn't go to college, just trying to like good hardworking people. And I think and also too, like growing up in the Rust Belt, I grew up in this part of the country that was like already kind of depressed. I joke now with friends that it's like JD Vance vibes, just because people know who that is, and kind of like it gives them a little bit more of a picture of how someone like me might have grown up. And there's not a lot of economic opportunity. Like my choice, I didn't know many people that went to college. Most of my peers growing up didn't go to college, and so even college was like this, like, how do I even do that? Let alone like I didn't know what tech was. I didn't know what like software engineering was, like venture capital, like all of these. I didn't even know what Ivy League schools were. I didn't realize there was a difference between someone that goes to Harvard and Stanford and someone that goes to a local community college. There's a really big difference between those two things. I knew none of that. And so I started working when I was like 14 or 15, pretty much worked 80 plus hours a week until college. I was able to pay my way through school that way, but I went to this like shit school in Florida. And like by the time I really started getting into the like, okay, I want to have a real career, I really don't want to be poor, I'm interested in doing something entrepreneurial someday. It was like, to me, it was like, okay, Wall Street seems cool. And then like tech, I started learning about tech because actually I was interested in Wall Street, and I was reading the Wall Street Journal, and I started hearing about these like tech companies that were raising all this venture capital. And so like, it was really just like a lot of like learning on the internet at first. And then I ended up starting a company, which is kind of like a very different rabbit hole, when I was 20, with some people that were more experienced than me. It was really more of a small business than it was like a real venture-backed company. It was in the Midwest. We raised a little bit of angel money. Long story short, it wasn't successful. We like sold it, like just didn't lose people's money. And then I worked at a venture fund in the Midwest. And so I'd kind of like broken my way sort of into tech by the time I was like 20 to 20. This is like 20 to 22-ish is like this like period of my life. But it was like at the end of the day where I was at is I'd like, gone to a shitty school. I did not come from money. I didn't know people. I didn't really have much of a network. I had worked on this like small business-ish thing that like at the time, actually, when I was like trying to break into tech, it still hadn't sold. So we hadn't like even gotten an outcome out of it. And I was like, I'd like kind of made my way. I was in Columbus at that point, Columbus, Ohio. And I made my way into like some kind of a tech ecosystem, but it was clear like there was just a lot less capital, a lot less founders. People were less ambitious. Even the investors that were there, they kind of pushed you to play small ball. And it was just, there was a very clear difference between the people I would meet that were from the coasts or on the coasts and where I was at. And I realized at that point, it's like, okay, if I want to have a serious career in tech, in my opinion, the best thing I could do is to try to get to the coast or get to one of these companies on the coast. Problem with that was like, I'm again like shit college, not really a network outside of this like really small tier 3 tech ecosystem. And it's like so how do I do this? And so fortunately, as we alluded to earlier, COVID, maybe not fortunately, but fortunately for my career, COVID happened and put everything on the internet. And before that happened, I was in the middle of like trying to figure out how do I like get out of Ohio and kind of onto one of the coasts. And fortunately, like everything went to Twitter. So I was on Twitter. I got on Twitter and started like building a little bit of a network there. That led to kind of seeing what On Deck was doing at that point in time. And this is like 2020. They were like just coming out. They'd raised the seed round. They were doing a program for founders, which led to doing a bunch of other stuff later. But I DM'd Eric Torenberg on Twitter. And I forget exactly the reason initially, but they were hiring for some role. It was still like a really small company. And they actually rejected me the first time, but I just kind of hung around the hoop and kept bugging them. And so then they hired for another role later. And then I'm fortunate that they hired me to come in and do like op stuff and like launch online communities essentially. And this is in a time where that company ended up becoming like very hot for about a year or two, like raised a ton of money, like scaled really fast. And I was fortunate to be a part of that company during that period. I got to do a few different things there. And that's how I met you. I spent even more time with you through that, because one of the things I did there is I ran their angel investor community, and that like, and so I think some of the folks in that community invested in Seed Scout. And so like I got fortunate to just meet a lot of really incredible people. I basically got a shot at this company. That company did well, so I finally had a stamp of some kind on my resume. I started building my network, and I just worked really hard in the company and really hard at building my network kind of through the work for the company. And I moved. I like spent some time in San Francisco. I ultimately moved to New York, and it was really like, it was the moment that like set my career up to like at least to like kind of be in the room and to have a shot. And I like really everything else that I've done since then, you can kind of tie back to, I think, that moment of getting that shot and then just making the most of it from there. Yeah, like so I kind of can go whatever direction from there, but really I think everything was like started in that moment. It just like getting. Luckily, someone finally gave me a shot, and I just did my best to make the most of it from there.
I have a tough question. It's tough because I've been thinking about this question for years, and I can't come up with an answer. Maybe you have one. Like for a while, and you know this, like a lot of the point of like before Seed Scout, I had Forward Thinking City, which is like Silicon Valley in the sky, right? And then it was Seed Scout, and the whole point was to help outsiders break in. And I think for a while, I had a thought on, you can do this from anywhere. Like you can do the venture capital, then you can build a tech startup from anywhere. And I think as of now, I mean, for people listening, you know, I mentioned on previous episodes, but Seed Scout, you know, doesn't really exist anymore, which is kind of sad. But you know, it didn't work out. I think one of the reasons is like is today I don't know if you can actually like do it without going to the coast if you don't already have like an edge or a network objectively allowing you to raise. Like, I just don't know if it's possible, which is kind of like sad to say, but like I think I may like finally have gotten there. Would you agree? Would you disagree? Like, can you do this stuff without moving to like New York or San Francisco?
I think you can. I think it is so much harder if you try to do it that way. Like so, and there's like a spectrum here. There's like where I was at originally, starting off like in the Midwest, in a initially nowhere, and then in a tertiary ecosystem and not at all part of the coast. And coming from that background, the best I think I could have done if I just stayed there. I eventually, after years and years and years of plowing my way, maybe I raised from like one of the local VC funds. And it's like shitty terms, shitty investors that might replace me if shit does not go amazing at all. And then maybe if we have enough success, maybe someday I'm like one of those few that makes it, and I don't know, like someday raises like a growth round from like a growth fund, because like they'll invest in anything if the numbers are amazing. It doesn't matter where you're based at that point. So I think I could have maybe done something successful, but I probably would have had to bootstrap more. I would have been much more resource constrained. I'd have been much more limited in who I can recruit. I would have had a very hard time, maybe an impossible time, raising from the coasts. And so if like that limited me to local investors, I would have just had a lot worse options, worse terms. Like we're everything is on hard mode. The middle, there's like, and then the extreme is like, go to the coast, be there, like be all in, build your network there, like an event, like raise from those people, do that thing, and just like say like, fuck it, I'm gonna like do whatever it takes to get there. And then there's like some in betweens, and in between might be like, I'm like, okay, I want to stay in Ohio, or like pick your city, but I'm gonna like get really good at Twitter, and I'm gonna like be on Twitter. I'm gonna like have a podcast or something, and I'm gonna build my network this way. Maybe I even go for like a week or two trip to SF or New York like a few times a year, and like I'm gonna keep the benefits of being here, but I'm gonna like intentionally build the network online, and maybe some in-person trips in that place. I think that's probably the healthiest middle ground. And then like maybe like one last one that I've seen some people do is like, I'm just gonna do it for like 2 or 3 years. I'm gonna go live there. I'm gonna go be there. I'm gonna build a network, and then I'll come back later, and then I can kind of like have the best of both. So I think there are some shades in between that you could kind of make work. But what I'm getting to is, it is playing on hard mode to not be in one of the hubs. And if you're purely optimizing for just like the maximum odds of success, there is, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, just go to the hub. Like don't like just go do it. If that is your number one thing that you're optimizing for, everything is going to be easier. And like I'm not saying that the world is fair, that it is that way. I don't think that's fair. But it's just like my pragmatic take is, it is going to be immensely easier if you do that than if you try to stay in like Columbus like I was, and like hope hope that you can build it. And Columbus, it could be a lot worse. Like Columbus had something. Like you could be, there are some cities where literally there's probably not a single startup. So yeah, I think it's a much better bet for your career if you're optimizing for success to be in San Francisco or like some equivalent, like a New York or even like an Austin.
Yeah, I feel like just like 3 years ago, I probably would have like a visceral, like, that's not true, like XYZ, but no, I completely agree. You know, like, it's like, I just think you need to see it. I think you need to like be in the industry long enough to understand why that's the case. And then when you see it, it's like, okay, you know, and then you can kind of decide what you want to do about it. Like, you don't have to build a venture-backed company to be in tech, right?
Totally.
You can, you know, there's a million other ways, but some people just like want to be the founder. Like that, I think a lot of people start there, and it just, you know, I think it does make a lot of sense to, you know, go to the coast or do one of the strategies you mentioned. I want to go back to your story and essentially go to the point, like, when you decided you wanted to start a company, or when you actually started a company, when you started Taxwire, like, was it like kind of a thing where you quit your job, you raised some money, you started building? Did you raise money while you had a job? Like, just like walk me through literally, like,
yeah, totally.
Where were you at the time? And then, I mean, I know, but just for the audience, where were you at the time, and like, how did you make that transition over?
I'll be like super transparent here and stuff too, because it's like audience I think is like, again, startup folks, and so I think it's always was annoying to me because you're always getting as an outsider, and in still ways I feel like an outsider quite often still, definitely not as much as I did. It's like you hear these manufactured stories that are just like not really fully the truth, and so it's like even me, I'm like guilty of it too. It's like when I'm talking to a CFO of like a bigger company, and it's like I'm not going to go into all of the details of like my past. It's not even that I wouldn't lie about it if asked about it, but it's like there is a little bit of myth building that goes on, and so I'll kind of color both the myth and the not myth part. So the myth version of Taxwire / my story is like I actually do share a good bit about like how I actually did get started. But then when I talk about starting this company, I talk about how I was head of growth at a startup originally called Party Round, later called Capital. We built like, you know, fundraising, banking, payroll software, got acquired by Row, which is another company in that space, raised a bunch of money from A16Z. And we're really known for having this like very beloved brand by startup founders, which all of which is true. But also, what I don't mention is that like I quit right before that acquisition happened, because it was like I for varying reasons that we could get into if you want. I still have that team there, but it was like an acquire. It wasn't an amazing outcome anyway. And then I quit without really knowing what I was going to do next, except for like I had this. It was like, okay, I think I want to start a thing though, but I was like so all in on that company that I had no idea what. And so again, so the myth version is from that point, my friend Hunter asks me to, like, you know, come help them out with finance and ops stuff at his company. And I help out for a few months while they close their Series A. We have a huge sales tax issue. And like, and I go into that, and all of this is true. And I had that huge issue at that company. And he jokingly says, we'll be your first customer if you start a competitor to like, so we compete with a couple really big companies in the space that in my opinion suck. Avalara being the most notable of them. I was a customer. He's like, go build an Avalara killer. We'd be your first customer. And there is some truth to that narrative. But what is also true is that like I was literally, as he was at, so I quit my job. I didn't have income. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, I had like 18 months of personal runway to just like fuck around and figure it out of like just cash that I'd saved. But I was trying to like, okay, I can't just like fuck around forever. I don't have like infinite cash here. And this is like my life savings basically that I'm living on. And so I'm in that place. I'm trying to figure it out. I was like I probably tested like a dozen startup ideas that I'd like written down over the years. And even a couple of them were kind of sort of working, but I just kept like finding something about it that I didn't personally like I didn't see myself doing this. And then I took the thing with my friend's company because he's like, we'll pay you like something so you're not just burning cash and you can just like help out. And then I actually did have the problem there. But even still, like it took him like 2 months of telling me to take this seriously as like, this is actually not a bad idea to do this. I was like, no, sales tax is dumb. That's not a good idea. It was not as like I was destined to do this, or even like this was just so obviously a big opportunity to me as you sometimes make it out to be. There was a good 4 or 5 months of me like not having an income, not like trying to figure out what I wanted to do, like considering a lot of ideas, kind of feeling trapped in the idea maze until I really started to take this seriously. And even then, even as I like fleshed out the idea for Taxwire and began to see that it could be a really big idea, some people I really admire told me this is either that this was a bad idea for some XYZ reason, or that like, hey, this is a good idea, but like, do you really want to do taxes with your career? And so like, I had these people I respected, giving me mixed advice. So that was hard. Again, I still don't really have income because I went right back to being all in on this thing. So I had like little to no income for most of 2023. And then eventually I had a co-founder that came in that it was like, I had recruited in, it wasn't the right fit. So I had to like end that. And then I fortunately convinced another friend who is now my co-founder, Steven, who we worked together at On Deck. I got him to leave his job, and then he came in. And then, but still, I didn't have income. We were still very much figuring out what we were going to do. And then like fall of 2023, we like went and raised money, and I'm happy to talk about what that process was like. And we're fortunate to like raise, and by that point, it kind of came together. End of 23, we raised a good bit of money, and that have been kind of off to the races since then. But 2023 was like, honestly, for much of that year, as I like left that job, I had options to do other things, but I didn't do them. And I've got like my parents who don't understand what I do in the first place being like, you made an order of magnitude more money than we ever thought anyone in our family would make, and you're like gonna like fucking like leave that to go start a company. So like they didn't get it. I felt like a bit of an idiot because I'm like, man, like you spend, when you're in the idea maze, you spend like 8, 9 months constantly being like, oh, I'm a founder of like, I don't know yet. And it's like, and even if you know what yet, it's like you don't have any customers, and you're not fully sure how you're going to build the product. And it's like, and if you're like non-technical like me, you don't have a technical co-founder for like the initial part. And it's like, and it's like a lot of like uncertainty, getting punched in the face. And then even then for us, like it did kind of work out. I have like friends who went through that for like years. Like I felt like going through that for like 6 to 8 months was awful. I have friends who went through that for like 2 years before landing somewhere positive. So I would say that's probably the longer version than what you wanted, but I was intentional about, I wanted to start a company. I was kind of fortunate to stumble into something that like actually felt like a really interesting opportunity that did kind of draw a little bit on some of the things I'd done previously. But even yeah, like several months of just like things that I fucked up, and like looking back, like just almost really really fucked up. Had I like not like that original co-founder, for instance, if I had just kind of let that ride, I think this whole thing would have imploded already. So there was a lot of like uncertainty. I didn't raise, maybe I should have. I know people that did that. I did not raise money beforehand. I could have saved myself maybe some like life savings. Because I probably burned through like, I live a pretty lean life, and I burned through like tens and tens of thousands of dollars of like my own money just getting this thing off the ground. So
I appreciate you sharing all of that. That's honestly so realistic. Like it's like I don't have like a similar. It's not like I have the same story, but like I think every founder that starts a company, has a version of that where it's like the early days, just like that kind of like unclear.
It's not pretty.
The idea maze. It's really not, and that's why a lot of people don't make it even just past that phase. And I feel like simply getting past that phase of what the hell am I doing, and no one believes in me, and I'm not making money, and should I just get a job? Like, just like if you can get past that, I mean that's like, it's definitely not the hardest part, but it is the first hard part of building a company. I get that. I do want to. One of the last things I want to touch on. Before we're close to time is fundraising. Like you're someone who, like, you start off as like an outsider. We all start off as outsiders. Every single person in tech starts off as an outsider. You've made your way in based on decisions that you made. Again, quite. Because Party Round was also like very hot too for a period of time. Like On Deck, very hot. Party Round, Capital, very hot for a period of time. That's like 2 for 2. That's like, I mean, not necessarily 2 for 2 on just like massive economic win, but 2 for 2 on social capital win, right? So like, and you converted that into a company. So how did you fundraise for this, knowing that you kind of, at least, did you perceive it was a 2 for 2 in that way? And if so, how'd you fundraise knowing that was your track record?
I viewed it as like, I don't have a resume or a network based on where I went to school, where I worked so far, the people I know, how I grew up. So I actually did intentionally. I looked for, I tried to get at companies where I felt the people there were really smart, connected, regardless of what would happen, we're going to do interesting things. Because I wanted to learn, but also like I knew it's like that network will be valuable, and then I wanted a stamp on my resume that at least like wouldn't be some random startup that no one's ever heard of if it doesn't work. And so I felt even in the failure case they were going to be notable failures, and so that they like notable investors, all that stuff. So that like picking things like that was was pretty. And then even like I'd say with Party Round specifically, Jordy is one of the most charismatic recruiters, fundraisers, just people I've ever been around. And I lacked a little bit of especially then, like I still was kind of building my own confidence, and so I wanted to be around someone like that. And so I did those things intentionally. I would say it didn't feel like it was going to convert. I wasn't sure if it was going to convert, to be honest. I had a lot of anxiety about like, would people just forget me the moment I left? And to some degree they do. But I think what I also did in parallel with that is I worked really hard and earned a good reputation at both of those companies. I wasn't a slacker. And then I just built a lot of relationships and helped a lot of people with no expectations of anything in return throughout both of those companies. And so I did have an investor network. I had a network of some investors, but I could probably get introduced, even if it was like a mediocre intro, to most people in the Valley, if like a degree or two away. And so when it did come time to fundraise, we were fortunate that I basically was able to get every boss, every founder of every company I've been at, like all the Party Round on deck, everybody invested. So a lot of people that have been involved before just threw in an angel check into like an RUV or something. So that I had a lot of super connectors. I had like a list. I ran it like a process. It was not run like I hope someone gives me money. It was like we had a list, we had a process, we had introductory people. I had signal to like all of these people that had worked with me before were investing. I had learned enough about the game that I knew I was like, maybe I still fail, but I'm going to run all of the things I control well. And I guess, fortunately, I would say to answer your question, it did work out that way. Like we were able to, it was a tough time in the market. The market was not amazing. And we were like first time founders that were didn't originally have a background in the space that we were in, but ultimately I think it just came down to, we were legible enough. I had learned enough from other people of what I was doing to like run a fundraising process, and we were able to get the intros we needed. And then when those people referenced us, it was like, oh, I remember I loved the shit you did at, Capital or whatever. It's like, or they like referenced me to somebody I worked with before, and that reference was stellar. And so it's like, we were able to like kind of play the game in that way. So it did convert. It's not the same as being like a second time founder or something. And it's like, I had a term sheet before I like did anything. Like we still had to go run a process, and like tons and tons and tons of people told us no. But I think the actual battle is just like, can you look credible and be referenced well when you get in front of people, and then can you actually just get in front of people? And that is like half the battle. And then you have to know how to like pitch and get and like run a process and stuff. But that's all actually like easily learnable. The actual hard thing is just like collecting the social capital. So it did. We ultimately were lucky. It got pretty oversubscribed. We raised from people we liked. We got to choose to some extent at the end. But I also know like literally 2 years before that, I could not have done that. Like 2-3 years ago, before that moment in time, I would have been lucky to raise like a couple $100,000 from like shitty angels in the Midwest. So it was like very much like, I guess like maybe if I'm a listener to this and I am an outsider, the pro of this is that with like a lot of hard work, time, and compounding, and just like 1 or 2 lucky breaks, you'd be surprised how far you could get. The con of this is that like I definitely like I had to do a lot of stuff before even this company to get a chance to do that. And so it's just like how it's a long game. You got to have some luck. And I don't know, like I don't really know like how else I could have done it besides like, I guess like the only other option, if you want to, the only real speedrun I think on all of this is just get into YC, because if you get into YC, they kind of like help you speedrun everything. Otherwise you kind of just have to play the long game, work hard, get some wins on your resume, build some relationships, and then you could go do what like I think at this point you could definitely do the same thing. You in like 2019 might have had a much harder time like or 2018, like I'm sure like you did raise money then, but it was like much harder than it probably would be if you started a new company today.
Oh yeah, well it's ironic because Seed Scout, like it is kind of funny in hindsight, because I wanted to help outsiders become insiders and raise capital, but I myself like didn't really know what I was doing. But then through doing Seed Scout, raising about 450,000, helping companies raise tens of millions, I now like know exactly how this works. So if I did decide I wanted to start a venture backed company, which like I don't know if I do actually, like I think that I've seen a lot and I might start one in the future, but I also may not. I don't know. Like it is pros and cons, right? But if I did decide to raise money for something in the future, I think I'd be able to be much more successful than I was in 2020.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and there definitely are pros and cons.
Yeah. One quick thing I want to touch on, and then we'll call it a day, is you said something that is obvious to you. It's obvious to me. I think it's really not obvious to like most people. You said the hardest part of fundraising is not the pitching and the process, but it's like acquiring the social capital, and like getting into rooms and getting access. Can you just explain why? Like, I mean, just for people that maybe
I
aren't
actually
there,
think, I'll try to, but I think the easiest way, because again, like how you actually build it is really like hard to prescribe because everybody's journey is going to be the same, but the anecdotes are more helpful than me giving you a playbook. Because I think my playbook, like the exact heuristic wouldn't work for everyone. So
Sure.
so On Deck. I worked at On Deck. I got the chance to build relationships with hundreds of like angel investors, but also but a lot of the people in On Deck Angels at the time went on to start funds. They were some of the like emerging manager cohort of that era. So I met a bunch of emerging managers and like super angels in that period of time. So like a lot of relationships right there. Obviously On Deck and Capital both had amazing cap tables themselves, and so I met a bunch of people that way. I kind of like did the run and gun, do some SPV deals that way too, to like just try to be around things and learn. And then a bunch of my friends were founders, and so I'd kind of seen what they did and like just kind of learned by osmosis of being around them. And so that's like maybe that's like a lot of the learning of like how the game works. So like I got into the rooms, I built relationships, and I learned how the game works. So translating that into like the actual like thing. So when we went to raise for Taxwire, the first money that actually came in was I had a bunch of people that were like, when you're ready to raise, like I'll be in or whatever. It's like I had those kind of like on call. But we actually got preempted a little bit, sort of. We had a weird pre-seed raise. So a friend of mine that I met, I think, while I was at On Deck and became much closer with while I was at Capital, he and I had become close. He has like dropped out from like really good school, did super well, is like a great person, raised like a pretty big pre-seed for his company. And then one of the investors from that round, he was apparently talking me up to them because he was like, dude, you really got to meet these people. I think they're really great. I think you'll really hit it off with them. And I was like, I'm not raising yet, but like I'll meet them. This just because you've talked them up so much. This is August or September, maybe September of 2023. And like the guy, this is like a one-off. Most people don't work this way, but we did really hit it off. And he was basically like, I want to invest. I don't care what you're building. I don't care that you don't even have your co-founder fully lined out yet. Like, I just want to invest. So that was the first 600K. He literally, like, within a week of meeting me or 2 weeks of meeting me, like, invested 600K at a great price especially for like us having essentially nothing. And then we kind of brought in a bunch of like the early angels around there, and we're actually going to do a really small pre-seed there and like do a seed later. And then what ended up happening is we realized as like I did get the co-founder right, we kind of got some early momentum. I was like, actually, no, this is like now it's October. I'm like, actually, I had two things happen. A founder that I really admired. So again, that first investor, like most of the people that invested at that point were like all people I had like. So that fund, it was a pure warm intro. You cannot like nothing. I could not recreate that at all if I wanted to. It was like a thing that happened by circumstance, I guess. The angels that came in around that time, founders of companies I've worked at before. One of them was a guy in On Deck Angels who had like dealt with the problem we were solving really viscerally. And so when I just caught up with him to get advice, he was like, I'd love to invest in your company. Does 25,000 sound great? There were like 2 or 3 people like that where I was just blown away that it even happened. I didn't fully plan it. And then so then October comes and we're like, actually, we need more money than we think to really do this right. And then at the same time, a founder friend is being like, dude, the easiest time to raise money is when you technically don't need to raise money and have momentum. So just like kind of like you got like preempted a little bit, just like go raise more. And so we're like, okay, we're actually going to raise 1.5 and try to round this out. So we turned around, got our shit together as fast as we could and started running a real process to round the rest of the round out. And that was really hard because we got rejected a lot and we were like cold starting it and it was coming towards Thanksgiving. But then eventually we got momentum and like all of those intros are like, so a dozen or so of those angels were introducing me to other people in like their networks and being like, Andrew's like one of the best people. So it's like, it would be people like my boss at On Deck was like a very well-connected angel investor. He introduced me to like a dozen people. Another friend of mine who was like a small angel from like this place I met, like that I just gotten to know him since Capital. Actually, I met him right as I was joining Capital. We become really good friends. He knew a lot of investors because his agency all they did was work with VCs, and so he introduced me to a bunch of people. There were a couple other founders I knew that they introduced me to their cap tables. Like one guy I met at a coffee shop that I met through a guy I used to work with at On Deck. He and I got coffee in New York. He knew my problem really well. He used to be a VC. He was a founder now. He's like, I'm going to introduce you to my entire cap table and invest. Literally, he introduced me to like 30 people. And so it's like, so some of this was like, I was literally like figuring out who do I know that knows this person, please intro me. That was probably like 30-40% of it. And the rest of it would just be like people like that were like, I will like send me your list. I will introduce you to everybody I know on that list, plus 5 other people you weren't even aware of. And so it's like literally stuff like that where it's like, without those relationships, I don't even really know like how you would do this. or how I would have done it that way at least. And so really like everyone we met was kind of like that, where it was just like we got introduced by some node in the network. And so it's like if you're where I was at in 2019 and you know like 2 funds in Columbus that kind of suck too, and like 5 angel investors who are also not going to invest in anything less than like 500K in ARR, and they're going to want to do it at a like $3 million valuation. It's like, what do I even like? And also too, like you think people are, you think it's hard raising as a young founder in Silicon Valley. Try raising as a young founder in Columbus, Ohio. Like you're going to get laughed out of the room. And so, it's like so different. I don't even, and then if I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to go to the coast. Well, who do I know on the coast? Who's going to introduce me to anybody on the coast? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't even know how I would go about getting those introductions. Like I could cold email people, but no one's going to respond to my cold email. So it's like, I know that's not like a playbook, but it is literally like it's just like the fact that like that it's like the fact that so that guy that introduced me to his whole cap table, he's like, I know this space really well. This is a big problem. Also, this founder's dope. His story's really cool. He's really close with my buddy over here. You should totally meet him. And then I get on the phone with that investor. We have a great first call, and then he pings everybody he's mutually connected with on me, and all of the signals coming back are like, Andrew's dope. Give him money. This is like what one person said. I can't recreate that except for the fact that I had just worked really hard and gotten lucky that some people took chances on me and were like willing to go to bat for me. It's like I don't like, I didn't tell those people to do that for the most part. Like the most I did was just like ask for introductions. And I think like it sounds like the introductions are hard, but I guess to like clarify one last thing about that, it's like the fact is these investors are getting so much stuff that they're just pattern matching machines. Most VCs are just pattern matching machines. If they don't know your school, if they don't know where you've worked at, if they're not getting, and even if they like did, if they don't know someone that's introducing you, they get so much inbound. It's going to get filtered out immediately by like 90% of people, maybe more. And so having some signal to your resume and having like warm introductions gets them to take you seriously. Like when I I didn't send a single cold email to get this round done. Every single person was like a blurb I would send someone, and then they would write their own like little sentence as to why they think highly of me and they should talk to me. And like, so like I'm never coming in as like, hey, please look at my company. I'm coming in as like, hey, this person's dope. I worked with them, or like, I know them through this, or the thing they're working on is a really big problem, or it's like, this is, you told me you were like interested in the tax space. You should meet this founder. It's like all stuff like that. That is like so different than like than the hundreds of cold emails that an investor is getting every single day. And it may not be fair that the world works this way, but that is basically how startup fundraising, especially at early stage in Silicon Valley, works. And so if you're able to be one of those people coming through that like door, your odds of them even taking a meeting with you are like an order of magnitude higher. Like versus like if I'm cold emailing them, I'm lucky if like I send 1,000 cold emails, I'm lucky if like I get like 5 to 10 meetings. And those meetings are also like the worst. They're like the most, I almost didn't take this meeting on my calendar meetings of the day, versus like, and then two, half of this is momentum. And I know I'm like going way longer than you probably wanted to, but like half of this is momentum. So it's like by the time, like I was also nervous as fuck during this process. I was so, cause like no one in my family is like, the money in our bank account from all this fundraising is like more money than I ever thought I'd see in my life. Let alone like imagining like doing it as a company. And so it's like, this whole thing was very foreign to me, even though I'd been in the industry enough. So it like felt weird. I was very nervous, but like the thing that, you know what helps with nerves? You know what helps you get better at pitching? You know what helps you other people feel like shit? Like this founder is like a force of nature, is the fact that like I'm talking to like a dozen people a day. So I don't have time to be nervous beyond a certain point. I get a lot of reps. And like everywhere they ping, it's like, hey, what do you think? You were talking about the tax space. I just like, oh, you're already talking to Andrew and Taxwire. And it's like, and then they start hearing that. And next thing you know, they're like, and then when I'm talking to them, it's like, yeah, it's like, they're like, oh, have you met? And it's like, yeah, I talked to them yesterday, or I'm talking to them tomorrow. It's like word gets out that like, oh, this thing is like moving. And so it's like all the momentum starts to be in your favor too, because you're like doing this all really quickly, which is part of what makes it work. Versus if you're just like desperately trying to cling to like the 1 or 2 meetings you can get, you have no leverage. You're like, they're not taking you that seriously. They probably string you along. And so I don't know. It's just like so many of the dynamics that make a venture fundraise at early stage are driven by these social capital dynamics. And if you don't have social capital of your own to draw on, and you don't know how the game is played, and you're not able to just like effectively play it, it's really, really hard. And so like the reason why I mentioned the thing about YC before is I spent years building myself into the kind of person that could make a go at doing that. Whereas YC, if you get in there, well, one, most of them already are like the kind of people that could do this probably anyway, or like went to like a good school or something. But that aside, even if you're a total outsider, if you get into YC, you are now a YC backed founder. YC will put you in front of, like, every fucking fund in Silicon Valley is looking at YC demo day. Like, all of it, like, they come to you, they want to talk to you, you're gonna get introductions to whoever you want, everyone's gonna take you seriously. It's like, doesn't matter if you went to Harvard or not, you're a YC company now, you're automatically taken seriously. And so it's just like, and like YC, the partners are gonna give you a crash course on exactly how to play the game, so that you like don't like walk in there like an idiot, and so that you like, you know, position yourself for the most success. And it's like, all of this is just boils down to like social capital and can you hack it. And so I don't know, I wish I had like a better point to that, but it's like I wish someone had just made it that crystal clear to me when I was like 20, and nobody did. Not really. It took me years of like beating my head against the wall to even figure out how it works, let alone get shots. And so I guess my message to all of you is like, if you want to do this, I hope you're really successful and figure this out. But just like when you see someone even like me that's being, oh, he raised all this money, it's like, well, yeah, but it's like I also like spent years getting to that point, and it's like I couldn't have done this when I was 20, and like I don't know, like just like don't, I guess if you're trying to fundraise right now and you don't have a network and you are one of these outsiders, I don't know, don't, it's probably not an indication of just you as a human that you can't get meetings. It's more of an indication of just like the fundamental advantages or disadvantages that you do or don't have in the game that is being played. It's not because you're a shit human. It's just like your cards suck, and so you either find a way to get better cards, or you know, you make the best of what you do have. But like generally, I actually think it's like, if you don't like the cards you're dealt, a thing nobody tells you in this life, you can just go get fucking better cards. And so like, it's like, I think a lot of times just go get better cards and you'll have better chances of winning. So long rant, way more than I planned on giving. I hope that's helpful to somebody.
I mean, I feel like that, I don't know how long that was, but that was like the most golden alpha I think that has ever been shared on the podcast in like 965 episodes. So that was awesome, mainly because it's just no one talks about that like that. Like, that is how it works. That is the game. That is it. You just distilled it in like 7 minutes, however long your rant was. That was incredible. So thank you for sharing. We're before we end it, where can someone learn more about you? Do you have a Twitter? Do you have LinkedIn? What's your website?
One, thank you for having me. I think like one thing I've always admired about you, Matt, is that you just like I actually do think like like what Seed Scott was trying to do, everyone told you it wouldn't work, and I think a lot of people felt that way, but I always thought like I always thought that was a hard idea to make work too. But I think you are the person I think of as like, I literally have used you as an example after you shut down. I was like, because I met someone recently working on a similar idea. I was like, if he couldn't figure it out, if he didn't get it to like work at enough scale, you're not going to, because he got further than I thought anybody ever would at that idea. So it's like, and I think you've done a lot of good for people in the ecosystem, and you're just a good dude, and you like hustle hard. And so I've always really admired and appreciated and respected you. So thank you for having me. I would say if anybody's interested, if like you're dealing with sales tax stuff, selfishly plug, like hopefully we can be helpful. So taxwire.com, or just like hit me up I'm on Twitter at Andrew Ray, LinkedIn. I have a Substack. I don't write on it that much, but when I do, it tends to be real shit. Yeah, I'm at those places. I try to answer my DMs, and I don't know, just like, if nothing else, I'll like try to be no bullshit with you. And yeah, thank you for having me, sir.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.